I'm Georgia Langford. I'm 34 years old, and as I stood in the grand foyer of Langford House for this year's annual Family Summit, I felt like a misplaced chess piece on a board I used to know. Around me, my relatives floated in silk and status, designer shoes clicking on the marble floors, laughter echoing off crystal chandeliers, Rolexes glinting beneath French cuffs. My simple navy dress and worn leather flats drew passing glances and condescending smiles, like I'd wandered in from the staff entrance. They still thought I was the poor cousin, the one who rents, who drives the same old sedan, who's making it work. What they didn't know was that my entire life, my work, my home, my finances, had been carefully built brick by quiet brick. And in the slim leather portfolio tucked under my arm was something none of them expected. Something that would finally show them who they'd been underestimating for over a decade. But first, a little context. My family, the Langfords, have been fixtures in Charleston real estate since the 1930s, when my great-grandfather transformed 2 waterfront plots into a booming rental business during the Depression. The Langford name still carries weight in South Carolina's oldest money circles. When my grandmother, Eleanor Langford, took over in the 1970s, she was the rare woman in a man's world, shrewd, elegant, and deeply principled. Unlike her flashy brothers, Grandma Eleanor believed that wealth was something you used, not something you flaunted. Real money, she'd say, shouldn't need an introduction. My father, her youngest child, inherited her mindset. He married my mom, a high school history teacher, in what the family still calls the union of good intentions and no assets. They chose a quiet life in Mount Pleasant, and while they were never rich, we were happy. My dad worked as an architect, designing homes that people could actually live in, not just admire from the curb. My mom taught American civics with so much passion she'd get choked up talking about suffrage movements. But when I was 15, everything changed. My parents were killed in a car accident driving home from a weekend anniversary trip. Just like that, my world tilted off its axis. Grandma Eleanor took me in. She moved me into Langford House, gave me the southeast bedroom that overlooked the Magnolia Grove, and told the rest of the family I was hers to raise. That's when the whispers started, behind ornate doors and past wine glasses, about the charity case in the hallways. But Grandma didn't flinch. Every night after dinner, she'd invite me into her study where we'd pore over market reports, rental ledgers, and zoning maps. Elise, Beckett, and the others will inherit Flash, she said once, sliding a thick folder of historical property values across the table. But you, if you pay attention, you'll inherit power. And I did. For 3 years, she taught me everything. How to spot undervalued neighborhoods before they trended, how to negotiate off-market deals, and how to analyze a tenant's potential just from the car they drove. She didn't believe in fast flips. She believed in compound growth, financial and personal. She also taught me patience, something my cousins never learned. By the time I turned 18 and headed off to the University of South Carolina, my grandmother had already planted the seeds of my future. She passed away during my senior year of college, leaving each grandchild an inheritance. My cousins, Beckett, Camille, Lila, and Ford, used theirs to buy things that screamed status: a beach condo, a 6-month Euro trip, even a custom fishing boat. I used mine to buy my first property, a rundown duplex in a neighborhood no one wanted to touch yet. I lived in one unit and rented the other, used the income to pay off the mortgage. Then I refinanced and bought another, then another, quietly. Always through holding companies and LLCs, guided by Grandma's old attorney, Mr. Donovan Walsh. My name never appeared on any property record. And year after year, I returned to these family summits with my cheap shoes and my outdated phone and endured the same ritual. my cousins bragging about their latest development wins and charity galas, while Uncle Harrison, the self-appointed patriarch, monologued about the importance of preserving Langford prestige. Every year, I gave a vague update about my work as a property consultant, and every year, they patted my hand like I was still 15 and fragile. But things were different this year. A month ago, I got word from Donovan that Harrison had reached out to him directly about selling Langford House, the crown jewel, the estate that Grandma had always said was never to be sold, no matter what. She wanted it preserved as a symbol of our family's roots. But Harrison wanted to cash in. He'd received an offer from a luxury developer eager to turn the grounds into a 12-unit boutique condo complex. I didn't even need to ask if my vote would matter. The family's governance structure gave weighted power based on contribution to family holdings. And as far as they knew, mine were negligible. That's when I made my decision. For years, I'd kept my head down, working quietly, building a portfolio that now included 15 residential units and 3 commercial properties, including, most ironically, the very apartment complex where Camille and Ford currently lived, unaware that their landlord was sitting across from them at Sunday brunch. So here I am, in this house full of people who never really saw me. Elise, my cousin, and one of the only decent ones, is already here. She's a pediatrician, and the only one who ever asked me how I was doing without checking my shoes first. She texted me earlier this morning. He's planning to announce the sale at dinner tonight. Be ready. I am, because this year I brought something with me. Not to boast, not to show off, but to preserve something real, to reclaim the truth about what our family legacy was always meant to be. And when I opened my portfolio and looked at the sealed documents inside, I whispered under my breath, "You picked the wrong Langford to underestimate." Langford House hadn't changed much since I last stayed here. The original crown molding, the creaky cherry wood floors, and the scent of jasmine drifting in from the back garden. It all made my stomach twist with a strange mix of nostalgia and apprehension. But even the beauty of the estate couldn't disguise the tension in the air. Dinner was formal, of course. Crystal glasses, polished silver, place cards with embossed names. I was seated at the far end of the table next to Lila, who barely acknowledged me except to nudge the breadbasket in my direction as if that counted as conversation. Uncle Harrison sat at the head of the table, where Grandma Eleanor once presided with quiet authority. His booming voice replaced her thoughtful cadence. His stories filled with profit margins and construction permits instead of people and purpose. The table buzzed with the usual status updates. Beckett bragged about his second short-term rental portfolio in Savannah. Camille had just joined the board of a luxury skincare startup. Ford was launching a bourbon brand and already designing merch. Lila showed off a diamond tennis bracelet she called her casual piece. When my turn came around, I cleared my throat and said, "Still doing consulting work. A few rental projects. All stable." Ford smirked. "You still driving that old Camry?" I smiled back. "She runs beautifully." The laughter that followed wasn't malicious, just dismissive. The kind that says, "You're not part of the game. You're not a threat. You're not even competition." But Elise, bless her, made eye contact from across the table and gave the slightest nod. I didn't need anyone else's approval, but her silent support still meant everything. After dessert, Uncle Harrison stood with a theatrical cough and clinked his spoon against his glass. "I'd like to propose something for Monday's family vote," he announced. "Something forward-thinking for the next generation of Langfords." He paused, allowing just the right amount of gravity to settle over the room. Then he gestured toward the tall windows that overlooked the grounds. "I've entered discussions with Westlow Development Group. They've expressed strong interest in Langford House and the surrounding acreage. A boutique luxury condo project. 12 units, all premium. The offer on the table is $46 million. I nearly dropped my wine glass. As you all know, he continued, this estate requires upkeep. Staff, maintenance, taxes. We've kept it for sentimental reasons, but sentiment doesn't pay for new roofing or security systems. It's time we let go of the past and reallocate the capital. I could feel my chest tightening. This wasn't just property. This was Grandma Eleanor's legacy. Monday, we'll vote, Harrison concluded. And in accordance with our governance structure, votes will be weighted based on current holdings. As always. I raised my hand before I could stop myself. Grandma made it clear she wanted Langford House preserved, I said. She told me this place was meant to be the family's anchor, not an asset to flip. Camille gave a light laugh, the kind meant to diffuse a moment but also undermine it. Sweet Georgia, I know this place meant a lot to you growing up, but we have to be realistic. And progressive, Beckett added. We're not trying to erase history, we're modernizing it. Ford jumped in. Besides, think about the distribution. Everyone gets their share. You could finally get that car you deserve. I didn't respond. Not to them. That night, back in my childhood room, the one Grandma had refused to redecorate, I sat on the bay window seat and stared out at the magnolia trees she once tended herself. I remembered her kneeling in the dirt, in her linen slacks and straw hat, teaching me how roots worked. If the roots are strong, she'd said, you can weather any storm. I pulled out my phone and texted Donovan Walsh. I need the Langford Holdings portfolio, all assets, all ownership docs, Monday morning reveal. His reply came within minutes. Already in motion, will overnight to the estate. Be sure. I was. The next morning, Sunday, we gathered in the smaller drawing room for the financial highlights session. It was a tradition that had grown increasingly performative over the years. Everyone presented a polished pitch of their earnings, investments, charitable donations, and new ventures. There was even a projector screen this time. Beckett went first, with a slideshow of drone shots of his beach rentals. Camille outlined her portfolio, emphasizing ESG investments and her curated art collection. Ford showed a video ad for his bourbon brand, featuring a custom soundtrack and slow-motion fire. Then came the casual complaints, mostly about that new property management company at the Riverfront Apartments, the luxury complex where Camille, Ford, and Lila all lived. The new owners have no idea how to treat tenants, Camille said, rolling her eyes. They raised the rent last quarter with zero warning. And the new policies are ridiculous, Ford added. I had to register my assistant just to get her access to the rooftop gym. It's like they don't know who we are. Uncle Harrison chuckled. We should figure out who's behind that acquisition. If it's a shell group, we might be able to apply some pressure. Use our network. I didn't say a word. Because the apartment building they were complaining about, I owned it. And they were my tenants. The irony should have stung, but it didn't. If anything, it confirmed that Grandma's strategy had worked. I had spent years operating in the background, growing my portfolio in silence, avoiding the Langford name and its political baggage. And now, with all the votes stacked against me and the mansion hanging by a thread, I was ready. After the meeting, Elise pulled me aside in the hallway. Don't say I didn't warn you, she said. He has the votes. Camille, Beckett, Lila, and Ford are all locked in. I nodded. He thinks this is just another financial win, I said quietly. But he's never actually understood what this house meant. What she meant. Elise studied my face. Are you going to fight it? I met her eyes. Not with words, with truth. Sunday afternoon drifted into golden hour silence as I sat at Grandma Eleanor's old desk, organizing the papers Donovan's courier had delivered that morning. Ownership documents, asset valuations, LLC breakdowns, the full map of everything I'd quietly built over the last decade. 15 residential properties, 3 commercial buildings, and the luxury riverfront apartments, currently housing 3 of my loudest cousins, all under shell corporations, all scrubbed of my name, all under my control. In this house, where I was once called the charity niece, I now held more property than nearly anyone in the room. But I hadn't come to flaunt numbers. I came to protect a legacy. I spent the rest of the day in my room, deliberately avoiding the wine tasting on the terrace and Beckett's after-dinner poker game. Elise texted me around 9 p.m. Tomorrow's session starts at 9 sharp. Harrison is expecting to finalize the mansion sale by noon. I responded, "Let him." The next morning, I dressed with care. Not in anything designer. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I chose a charcoal gray blazer, a pair of fitted slacks, and Grandma's single strand of pearls. Simple, timeless, strong. The kind of elegance she'd worn when negotiating million-dollar deals in a man's world. I pinned my hair back, slipped the leather portfolio under my arm, and walked to the library where they were already gathering. The room was perfectly staged. Leather chairs arranged in a circle, family crest embossed folders at each place. Pastries no one would touch. Uncle Harrison stood near the projector screen, straightening his tie as he smiled his politician's smile. "Good," he said as I entered. "Everyone's here. Let's get started." Each family member gave one final recap of their year in finance. Camille proudly announced her art pieces had appreciated by 12% thanks to a gallery partnership in Palm Beach. Beckett mentioned a potential investor from Dubai. Ford described plans for bourbon-branded retail stores in Nashville and Austin. Lila kept it vague, just a nod to diversified assets, which probably meant she was still living off trust disbursements. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, hands calm, gaze steady. My year was productive, I said. I expanded my holdings, focused on long-term cash flow, identified key neighborhoods ahead of market curve. Nothing flashy, just steady returns. That would have been the end of it, had Aunt Victoria not opened her mouth. "Still renting that little place downtown, dear?" she asked sweetly. "It's so brave how you keep things simple." I smiled. "I prefer to live below my means." Beckett chuckled under his breath. "You mean within them." More laughter followed, dismissive, predictable. But I didn't flinch. I just sat down. For now. Then came the part Harrison had been waiting for. "Now that updates are complete," he began, standing again. "Let's move to the future of Langford House. The offer from Westlow Development stands at $46 million. Each shareholder would receive their percentage, according to the family charter. We'll need unanimous signature before noon today." He handed out the contracts, then gestured to the display screen behind him. "And before we vote, just a quick item. Many of you have raised concerns about the Riverfront Apartments' new management. Camille, Ford, Lila. I'm working with a contact at City Zoning to identify the ownership structure. If we can learn who's behind the shell company, we may be able to negotiate a better deal. Or apply a little pressure." The casual arrogance was staggering. Camille crossed her arms. "They're trying to renovate the lobby again this week. At 8 a.m., the nerve." "And they raised my rent," Ford added, "by $75. Lila sighed. "Honestly, it's like they think we're regular tenants." The room chuckled. I stood again. This time, I walked to the head of the room and placed my leather portfolio on the table. "I'd like to clarify something," I said, my voice steady. "There seems to be confusion about the ownership of Riverfront Apartments." Uncle Harrison arched a brow. "Oh?" "Yes," I said, opening the portfolio, "because I own it." Silence. Real, stunned, slap you across the face silence. Camille blinked. "Excuse me?" I handed her a photocopy of the deed. "The building was purchased last year for $28 million, Through a holding company, Thistle and Moss Properties. The managing member? That's me. Ford actually laughed. You're joking. I looked at him flatly. I am not. Lila looked pale. You've been raising our rent? She asked in disbelief. Modestly, and only to reflect increased operational costs, security, maintenance, insurance. You're the one who made me register my housekeeper? Camille snapped. Yes, I said. After 3 separate reports of strangers using resident amenities and 1 attempted break-in on the 12th floor. I'm not just your landlord. I'm also protecting my investment. Beckett looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. This is insane, he said. You? You own that building. With what money? I reached into my portfolio again and pulled out a second document. My full holdings portfolio. 15 residential properties, 3 commercial buildings. Current valuation, $75.2 million. Another stunned silence. I passed copies around the table. Aunt Victoria flipped through hers with trembling hands. How long have you been doing this? She asked. Since college, I used my inheritance from Grandma Eleanor to buy my first duplex, lived in one unit, rented the other. I reinvested every profit, kept expenses low, and diversified steadily. Uncle Harrison looked genuinely confused. But why keep it secret? I met his gaze. Because I didn't want your interference, or your approval. I took a breath, then placed one final envelope on the table. Inside are the papers for the Josephine Legacy Trust. As of this morning, all my holdings are under its name. The trust also now owns 35% of Langford family holdings, including, thanks to a quiet acquisition last year, the 20% stake from Aunt May's estate. I now have blocking control on all family votes. Dead silence. Even Harrison seemed lost for words. I closed the folder. The sale of Langford House is off the table, permanently. Outside, the wind stirred the magnolia trees. Inside, no one moved. Elise was the first to break the silence. She leaned back in her chair and gave a slow, deliberate clap. Well, she said, I guess brunch just got more interesting. The silence after my announcement stretched so long, you could have heard the ice melt in someone's untouched water glass. Elise kept clapping, slow, steady, and just sarcastic enough to make the moment crackle. Everyone else? Frozen. Uncle Harrison's mouth opened, then closed. He picked up one of the documents I'd handed out and scanned it like he expected to find a typo that would unravel the entire revelation. 35%? He finally said, voice clipped. I nodded once. Correct. 20% from Aunt May's shares, acquired last year in a private sale, the remaining 15% from gradual buy-ins using discretionary proxies, all verified by Donovan Walsh. That's not possible, Camille blurted. We would have known. No, I said calmly. You would have suspected, if you'd ever paid attention. But you were too busy watching who wore what, who drove what, and who sat where at the table. A flicker of red spread across Beckett's cheeks. Lila looked like she was trying to melt into her chair. You manipulated the family charter, Harrison said, trying to pivot back to authority. This is highly irregular. No, I corrected. I followed the rules, meticulously. You established the weighted voting system based on contribution to family assets. You wanted control? So did I. I just didn't need a microphone to get it. Elise smirked, sipping her coffee like it was wine. Harrison cleared his throat again, louder this time. Even if this is legitimate, you've blindsided the family. The developers are expecting signed contracts today. Then you should call them, I said flatly. And tell them the vote has been blocked. Camille scoffed. You're going to throw away $46 million out of spite? No, I replied. I'm going to preserve Langford House out of principle. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the final document, the purchase agreement. This morning, the Josephine Legacy Trust made a formal offer to purchase Langford House from the family, matching the developer's amount, down to the dollar. The difference? The estate stays intact. No bulldozers, no rooftop cocktail bars, just Grandma Eleanor's vision. Restored. I walked it over to Harrison, laying it in front of him like a chess player announcing checkmate. You can accept the sale to the trust or fight it and risk public litigation. Your choice. For a moment, he stared at the paper like it had betrayed him. You've been planning this for how long? He asked. Since the day I heard you wanted to level this house, I answered. I won't let this legacy be gutted and turned into another status symbol. Lila's voice wavered. What are you even going to do with it? Just live here? No, I said. I'm turning it into something useful. I paused, then continued. The Josephine Legacy Trust will transform Langford House into a foundation headquarters. We'll provide financial literacy programs, mentorship for young entrepreneurs, and affordable housing strategy incubators. Everything Grandma believed in, but that got drowned out by champagne and stock tickers. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't shocked. It was contemplative, threatened, maybe. But something had shifted. Ford, never one for depth, muttered, "This is crazy." I turned to him. Crazy is building your life on appearances and calling it legacy. I built something real. And all without a single Langford penny beyond the inheritance you all wasted in a year. Camille looked at Harrison. You're really going to let her do this? Harrison's face was unreadable, but his silence was louder than a yes. The meeting fizzled after that. Some cousins quietly left the room. Others lingered, flipping through the portfolio as if it might suddenly say what they wanted to hear. Elise found me in the garden later, beneath the shade of Grandma's favorite magnolia tree. You good? She asked, sitting beside me on the old stone bench. I exhaled slowly. I think so. Shaky, but solid. You scared the hell out of them, she said with a grin. That was satisfying. Honestly, I said, I didn't want it to be a power play. But they left me no choice. You didn't just protect the house, she said. You exposed the rot. I glanced back at the windows of Langford House. They still shimmered like they did in my childhood, but today they felt clearer. Like they reflected who I really was now, not who they thought I'd always be. I just wish Grandma were here to see it. She saw it coming, Elise said. That's why she chose you. Later that afternoon, the apologies began. First came the text from Beckett. Hey, didn't mean to be a jerk. Didn't realize you were building something that impressive. Maybe we should talk deals sometime? Then Lila, who came to my room under the guise of borrowing a charger, but really just wanted to make sure I wasn't planning to evict her. I reassured her I wasn't. But I'll expect the same rent as your neighbors, I added. She winced but nodded. Fair. Camille didn't say anything directly, but I noticed she suddenly followed me on LinkedIn. Ford just avoided eye contact. And Harrison? He sent Elise to relay a message. He respects your move. He'd like to meet for lunch next week. His treat. I smiled but didn't answer. Let them sit with it. Let them remember that the girl they once called a burden just saved their heritage and redefined it. Not with noise, not with tantrums, but with structure, silence, and strategy. That night, I stayed up late in the library. I lit the fireplace the old-fashioned way and sat alone with Grandma's favorite leather-bound ledger in my lap. The one she used to keep track of personal notes and side projects. Tucked inside the back cover was a faded envelope I hadn't opened in years. It was addressed to me. I unfolded the paper with care. In her looping cursive, Grandma Eleanor had written, Georgia. If they ever forget what legacy means, remind them, Not with your words, but with your actions. Quiet power is the most dangerous kind and the most effective. Love, Grandma. I closed my eyes and smiled. Message received. The days following the reveal at Langford House felt like aftershocks from a silent earthquake. Nothing looked broken on the surface, but the foundations had shifted, and everyone knew it. Uncle Harrison, ever the strategist, was the first to recalibrate. He invited me to lunch at the Charleston Club, his usual haunt for courting investors and dignitaries. It was the same place he'd once told me I wouldn't feel comfortable eating at because of the dress code. Now, he greeted me at the entrance like an old friend. "I misjudged you, Georgia," he said over oysters and steak tartare. "I suppose I underestimated what you were capable of." "No hard feelings," I replied evenly. "You only treated me the way you treat most people you can't immediately profit from." He gave a short laugh, the kind that said, "Fair point." "I'd like to discuss a partnership," he continued. "Your instincts are obviously strong. If we combine resources, we could expand the Langford name beyond the Southeast. I have connections in Miami, Dallas, even Dubai." I looked out the window at the harbor, let the salt air remind me of who I was. "I didn't build what I have by accident, Harrison," I said. "And I didn't build it to be absorbed into the same machine that ignored me for 10 years. His smile tightened. "You're turning down my offer?" "I'm saying we're not aligned in values. You pursue visibility. I pursue sustainability. I'm not interested in growing for show." He didn't argue. He just sipped his scotch, eyes cool, and that was that. The others followed with varying shades of forced humility. Beckett showed up at my apartment complex, unannounced, wearing a Patagonia vest and his best, friendly investor grin. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe we do a joint venture. Leverage some of your properties, flip them in secondary markets. I've got access to a hedge group that'd love to work with a woman-led portfolio." "How generous," I said. He didn't catch the sarcasm. "Let's circle back in a few weeks," I offered, "after you've read Grandma's ledger. You know, the one that said, 'Buy what no one else sees yet,' not 'buy what everyone's already chasing.'" He left after 10 minutes. Lila, to her credit, was more sincere. She sent me a handwritten note. "I've spent so many years pretending I had things figured out. Watching you calmly reveal you've been quietly building this empire, without rubbing it in anyone's face, was the most powerful thing I've ever seen. I'm sorry for dismissing you all these years. I truly am." I didn't respond right away, but I kept the letter. "Camille?" She didn't apologize. She pivoted. At the next charity gala, she introduced me to 3 donors as my brilliant cousin Georgia. She's redefining legacy wealth with this visionary foundation she created. The switch was so smooth, I almost had to respect it. Almost. I smiled for the cameras, shook hands, and later walked out before dessert was served. Because I hadn't done any of this for them, and I wasn't about to let them spin it for their benefit. Back at Langford House, renovations were already underway, but not for condos. The Josephine Legacy Trust had filed for historical preservation status and begun converting the East Wing into offices and meeting rooms. We brought back some of Grandma's original design elements: her antique map of Charleston, the sea glass chandelier from her Savannah apartment, the oil portrait of her as a young woman in a pale blue dress, the one she'd hidden in the attic because Harrison once called it too sentimental. Now it hangs above the fireplace in the main hall, a daily reminder that emotion and legacy are not opposites. They're fuel. The Whitmore Foundation, named for her maiden name, which she always said reminded her of who she was before money complicated things, was officially launched with a mission to provide financial education and property access to underserved communities in the Carolinas. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we host free workshops on budgeting, first-time home ownership, and community investment. Every chair is filled. Every voice is heard. And for the first time in decades, Langford House is filled with a kind of energy that has nothing to do with inheritance or bloodline. It's alive. Elise, of course, was with me through every step. She resigned from the pediatric board she was sitting on. Too political, she said, and took on the role of foundation director. She now spends half her week treating patients and the other half organizing mentorship programs. You realize we've become what Grandma actually wanted, she told me one evening as we stood on the second-floor balcony, watching the sunset paint the marsh in gold and coral. Not heirs, she added. Stewards. I nodded. Stewards with spreadsheets, I said, and we laughed. Sometimes I still drive my old Camry. It's habit, more than necessity. People notice it now, some with confusion, others with admiration. But I keep it because it reminds me of the years when no one was watching. When the real growth happened. When I had no audience, no applause. Just a clear vision and a single promise whispered into the wind. I'll make you proud, Grandma. And now, walking through the garden she planted, watching school children visit the learning center that bears her name, I know that I did. The Langfords haven't changed much. Harrison still holds court at family gatherings, though he's far more cautious now. Camille still dominates conversation, though she occasionally glances my way before delivering a bold claim. Beckett. Well, he's quieter, especially since I bought out the duplex next to his prized vacation rental and turned it into a low-income artist co-op that's now featured in half a dozen design blogs. Elise and I joke that it's the quiet legacy that rattles them most, because it's permanent, not performative, and they can't touch it. Some nights I still sit at Grandma's desk. I light the same candle she used to, the one that smells faintly of vanilla and old paper, and I write in the margins of her investment journal, not figures, not projections, but lessons. You don't have to scream to be heard, you don't have to show it to own it, and you don't need their permission to build what matters. 6 months later, Langford House doesn't just stand, it thrives. The front lawn, once used exclusively for garden parties and photo ops, is now a place where people gather to learn. Every Thursday afternoon, the main hall fills with young adults from across Charleston, first-generation college students, single moms, veterans, each one here to take part in our financial literacy workshops. We've named the initiative the Eleanor program, after Grandma. It focuses on what she valued most: independence, integrity, and stewardship. Topics range from budgeting and credit to long-term investing and real estate strategy. The same lessons she once taught me at that kitchen table, I now pass on to others. It's quiet work, purposeful, just the way she would have wanted. On the first Monday of every month, the Josephine Legacy Trust holds open office hours. Anyone can stop by, ask questions, and get one-on-one guidance. We don't wear suits. We don't serve champagne. We serve coffee and honesty. And the best part? The people we help, they don't care what last name is on the deed. They care about the doors it can open. That, to me, is the real Langford legacy. Not the silver spoons or the auctioned art, but the idea that wealth, true wealth, is meant to protect, not posture. Not everyone in the family comes around, of course. Camille still avoids any mention of riverfront apartments, even though she renewed her lease after the management stabilized. Beckett pretends we're rivals now, which is funny considering he once laughed at me for eating leftovers at brunch. Ford's bourbon brand launched, finally, and I bought 5 cases anonymously. They arrived last week with a handwritten thank you note and a brochure. Progress. Lila now volunteers at the foundation twice a month. She never mentioned her old snubs again, and I never asked her to. And Uncle Harrison? He stays civil. He even offered a toast at the last family gathering. To Georgia, who reminded us all that legacy isn't just something you inherit, it's something you build. It was a nice gesture, polished, practiced, but I didn't need his approval. That's the difference now. For years, I measured myself by their yardstick. How I dressed, what I drove, how little space I took up at those long tables. I bent myself into silence so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable, so I wouldn't invite more pity disguised as politeness. Now, I own the table, and I decide who sits at it. A few weeks ago, I stood alone in the rose garden, early morning dew clinging to the petals Grandma once trimmed herself. Martha, our longtime housekeeper, now retired but still visiting often, walked up beside me with a slow, knowing smile. She'd be proud, she said quietly. I looked at her, my throat tightening. She always said you saw things the rest of them missed, that you didn't need a spotlight. Just a clear path. I nodded. She was right. Martha handed me a small envelope. She left this with me, told me to give it to you when the house felt like it was yours, not theirs. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single note in Grandma's handwriting. Dear Georgia, the garden doesn't bloom for the loudest voice. It blooms for the one who tends to it with care, year after year. You are that gardener. Keep growing. Grandma. I stood there a long time after Martha left, the sun climbing higher, the city just beginning to stir. I had everything I needed. People ask me now, why didn't you show them sooner? And the truth is, I didn't need to. Success isn't about timing your reveal for applause. It's about building so thoroughly, so quietly, that when the moment comes, you don't have to prove anything. You just show up. I still drive the Camry, still live in my modest townhouse. I've upgraded my office, sure, and added a second team member to the foundation. But the core of me hasn't changed. I don't need flash. I need purpose. And every time I pass a property I bought a decade ago, when no one thought I was worth listening to, I smile, because I remember who I was when I made those decisions, and I respect her. She's the reason I'm here, not the cousin with the yacht, not the uncle with the developers. Me, the poor relation, the charity case, the quiet storm they never saw coming. So here's my message to anyone out there who's been underestimated. Let them laugh. Let them dismiss you. Let them whisper behind your back while you build your future brick by patient brick. Because someday, when the dust clears and the deeds are signed and the legacy is yours to define, you won't need revenge. You'll have results. Thank you for being here. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone else who's been quietly building something no one believes in yet. And remember, sometimes the most powerful move isn't showing off your wealth, it's waiting for the perfect moment to reveal it.